No rest for the weary. After a stellar Pacific Classic day, we are back at it for this week's edition of Best Bet. My name is Frank Scottoni, and I can't wait to dig in with my special guest to discuss the best betting opportunities on today's Sunday card. But first, just a reminder, this is not a traditional selection show. We are not going to talk about every race. We're just going to look at specific races and wagering strategies that offer the best opportunities to make a decent score. So if you're watching live, feel free to leave us a comment or ask us any questions. If you can't watch the host show live, it will also be archived on Del Mar's Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube pages. So let's get right to it. And let me introduce today's guest. She has a large Twitter following. She's a multimedia journalist. She's currently an anchor at a news station in Twin Falls, Idaho. But you all probably remember her as a host and racing analyst for TVG. Please welcome Candace Hare. Candace, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to be here. It's been, a few weeks in the making, so it should be fun. Obviously, trying to follow up what was a pretty big day at the races out your way yesterday.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit. It was a huge day, not just for Del Mar, obviously, but also for the Breeders' Cup, since that event is being held here. And we had a bunch of prep races yesterday. Any thoughts about the racing yesterday, just in general, and then also with implications going forward for the Breeders' Cup?
Yeah, I think everybody has a lot of thoughts. Certainly when you look at a horse like Tripoli, you have to feel like he really kind of established himself as a player in this division, which is interesting because I don't think anyone, even people out in Southern California, would have necessarily said that to be the case even just a couple of weeks ago. So kudos to him, obviously, kudos to Hronis Racing and John Sadler for having this horse and giving him the right opportunities to succeed, because there's a reason I'm not a trainer, Frank, and it's because I don't think I ever would have put a kitten's joy on the dirt going a mile and a quarter, but it's what we've seen the best of him come out from, right? And, he beats solid horses like Dr. Post, who we've seen run well on the East Coast. So really nice for him. I'm not sure I look at him as a huge Breeders' Cup Classic contender, but he's in the mix, and that's a spot that he wasn't not all that long ago.
Yeah, I did not give him as much credit as I probably should have. I knew he had been working well going into the race, but I had my doubts, and, well, I was proven wrong. And not the first time, won't be the last either. What about some of the other races on the undercard, maybe?
I think when you're looking from a Breeders' Cup perspective, the horse who makes the most sense to me as warranting that recognition is probably Mo Forza.
Yeah.
I was really taken by that performance we saw from him, first time having been away for a while. And I felt like that race is such a good benchmark as far as where you sit in this division, right? Horses like Smooth Like Straight, horses like, Neptune Storm, or even Count Again, or, Hit the Road. These are horses that, would they win a Breeders' Cup Mile? No. But they're very solid horses to beat them first race back off the bench. Right. And I think in a race where he didn't look like he was fully cranked, that's a really, really solid start going forward.
I agree with that assessment 100%. It would also be a super cool story because Barry Abrams, who passed away not too long ago, was a part owner of that horse, and I think maybe even bred the horse. So that would just be a cool story for California racing, because Barry was such a mainstay and a much-loved character out here, Santa Anita, Del Mar, Hollywood Park, even in harness racing from way back when. All you harness racing fans would remember Barry's name. So I heard you on Jason Beam's podcast not too long ago, and I thought it was a terrific interview. Super interesting, very insightful, entertaining. If anyone out there hasn't heard that, please do yourself a favor, look it up. Google Jason Beam, Candace Hare. It's a terrific interview. Everybody should give it a listen. But I particularly like the story of how you got interested in racing. So can you tell our audience just a little bit about how you got bit by the racing bug?
It was random, but not, I suppose. I was at my parents' house. I was in their kitchen. I remember where I was. And I saw Zenyatta on TV. They were talking about her on ESPN. And I saw them say that it was going to be her final race in California. Now at this time I had some ancillary knowledge of racing. My dad and my uncles would bet the Derby, they'd bet the Preakness and the Belmont and Breeders' Cup races, so I knew that those were big races, but that was all I knew. So just as a sports fan, I wanted to go out and see her in what was going to be her last race in California. I printed out past performances the night before because I knew they existed. I didn't know how to read them, of course. It's not always the easiest thing for someone who's brand new, but I tried to kind of look at them and figure some things out. And I went out there and ended up making a little bit of money on the day. And that's really what hooked me from a racing perspective. I still remember the first race, the day I was out there, there was a horse who I loved on paper, and her name was Tasty Treat. And then she ended up coming on the track, and she was this tiny little thing. She won the race, but I remember being real scared about my handicapping there, race number 1.
Tasty Treat. We all remember the one of some of our early scores, right? The first horse that I ever had a nice score on was Editor's Note in the Belmont Stakes a long time ago. And I'm so glad you mentioned Zenyatta, because even though on social media I like to use Point Given as kind of my handle, I love Point Given, one of my favorite horses. But when people ask me who's my favorite horse of all time, without hesitation, it's Zenyatta. Oh my God, I got chills watching her run every time. And what she did on the track was just absolutely remarkable. I happen to think she's the best horse I've ever seen in person. I don't know, some of the older people might dispute that, but just in the way she pranced around the paddock and just hammed it up for the fans. And she was truly a superstar.
She was, and she carried herself that way. I think Zenyatta is always a tricky conversation in the horse player world, because so many people will say, well, she wasn't that good, and it's Hollywood Park on the synthetic and all
I
these
know.
things. And I understand those elements of it, but for somebody who's brand new to racing, there was no experience like watching Zenyatta at the track. And I say that to this day, as somebody who's been lucky enough to travel around the world and go to some of the biggest races we have. As somebody who's been lucky enough to see other superstars in person like Winks, there wasn't anyone like Zenyatta. And I think that's why you see so many people, aside from me, who she got them into the sport, because watching her was unlike anything else.
Yeah. Whoops, just dropped my pen there. The way she won her races is what astounds me the most. I mean, she was a dead stone closer, and she'd come from the clouds every time, and you don't win that many races in a row with that kind of running style. So hats off to Zenyatta. I just love talking about her. You mentioned Winks. That actually brings me to my next topic. I know you carved out a real niche as an international racing expert. Tell us how you got interested in international racing, and then is there any advice you can give us horse players when it comes time for the Breeders' Cup and looking at European form?
Yeah, so for me, Zenyatta is linked, I suppose, to me getting involved in international racing, because I'd go out to Hollywood to see her that last time, of course. And when I went out to Hollywood the next time, I saw a horse named Grandeur, and he won the Twilight Derby out there at Santa Anita, and then he ended up finishing second in the Hollywood Derby. And he's just a beautiful horse, big gray horse, again, just gorgeous to look at. And I remember seeing him in both of those races. And then I think he went to the Hollywood Turf Cup, and he ended up winning that as well. And I just wanted to know where he was going to go next. Where's he going to race next? Is he going to come back to America? Is he going to race somewhere, in Ireland or in England? And I realized that wasn't easy to find out. It was just not, that information at the time was not readily available, especially for a horse like him who, here in America, he was a grade 1, grade 2 horse. But overseas, he was still kind of that high level handicap horse. Maybe he'd go into like a grade 3 at times, but he wasn't a big name. So I just started to kind of carve out contacts or ways to find out where these horses were or what they might be doing next, purely because of my love for that horse and wanting to know more about him. And, as I did that, there started to be some horses who I maybe remembered their dam or their sire just from when my uncles or my dad would bet. One of those was Ouija Board. She had a son who was racing over there. His name was Voodoo Prince, and he ended up going to Australia and was renamed our Voodoo Prince down there. He was a very nice handicap horse. And so those little tidbits here and there would kind of pull me in even more. But as far as Breeders' Cup goes, I mean, the big things I always say are, keep an eye on that now. You want to hear connections talking about the Breeders' Cup now. I'm always against those horses who it seems to be an afterthought. You
Right.
hear that a lot, but when you're following the news or even just reading, Racing Post or TDN or different entities now, you'll hear connections start saying Breeders' Cup. That's what you want to hear from a long way out. The other thing I would say is obviously, and this isn't just for Breeders' Cup, but for me, you're always looking for those horses who want firm ground, in
Right.
general, coming to America. I love, especially when you can find a French horse. It seems to happen there more than other places, but I love when you can find a French horse who maybe has never ran on firm ground and they're bringing them out here. That almost always means they know that they want that fast ground and they usually perform much better as a result. And I think the last thing I'd probably say, and last year kind of blew it out the window, but I try to some degree to avoid the Aiden O'Brien horses. Now he obviously had a huge priced winner, so it's, last year was a little bit of an anomaly. But I try to avoid them. One, because obviously they tend to go off at very short prices.
Right.
Two, a lot of his horses are bred for stamina, and I think that they tend to win with that in mind. They outstay other horses. That's not typically a conducive running style to America. His record in America is not good. It's very, very poor, especially over the last few years. And the last thing I'd say is he runs his horses a lot. I don't know if people who don't follow racing over there realize that he runs his horses a lot. We're not talking, here we're lucky if our best horses maybe run twice over a summer. His horses, the good ones, they'll run 4 or 5 times over a summer. So typically when they come to the Breeders' Cup, some of them can be just a little bit tired. Maybe it was a long season for them. So if you are going to go in that direction, I'd make sure it's somebody who's a price, or maybe somebody whose summer was interrupted. Maybe they had a slight injury or something, so they're a little bit more fresh. But I could go on about Breeders' Cup for internationals forever. I tend to kind of be the opposite from what people expect. I think people expect me to always tip up the internationals, but I find in Breeders' Cup in general, in those turf races, a lot of times they are really, really overbet. America has a better crop of turf horses these days than I think we get credit for.
Yeah, no, that's awesome information, and I really like what you said about the French horses because I look at them very, very closely. And we were talking about Zenyatta, talking about another amazing horse was Goldakova, right? French French filly who came over here and just absolutely dominated. So loved watching her run. Let's talk about your regular handicapping process. What are you looking for when you go through a card?
Oh man. Ugh. I would say I'm not looking for something specifically. If I am looking for something specifically, it's a bad favorite, right?
Sure.
That's where everything starts for me. If I can find a race where I don't like the favorite, then I can do something with that. Whether if it's in that individual race, if the field is large enough that I could work around some verticals, or maybe if it's a small field and I really hate the favorite, I'll do something horizontally, maybe singling someone else or using 2 or 3 others. But I'm obviously looking for a bad favorite. That's the start of a great race. Sometimes I'll hear people saying on social media a lot, look at this board. You have a 4-1, a 5-1, 2 6-1s. What a great betting race. And I'll be like, that is a terrible betting race.
Yeah.
Like a great betting race is when you have a 7-5 that you don't like at all. That's a great betting race. Those are the types of races that are always going to catch my attention.
Yeah, you can build a lot of tickets around beating bad favorites in those types of races. So I agree with you there. So let's just talk about the last topic before we get into the races. I know you have a pick 3 you want to discuss, and I'll ask you why you chose that in a minute. But first, talk about wagering strategies. I liked what you said you talked a little bit on Jason Beam's podcast about your math proficiency and how you can be an aggressive bettor if you find the right opportunity. Why don't you expound a little bit on that concept?
Sure. So, yeah, my degree is in math. And so as I said to Jason, I feel a little bit gifted or benefited in a way that I have an understanding of maybe in different scenarios, which betting opportunities or which wagering strategies could be the most beneficial just purely from a mathematical perspective. for me, I'm not married to one strategy, and I think that's what makes my betting the strongest. I don't look at a race and I'm like, okay, well, I'm a pick four better, so we got to
Right.
do this. I really try to change my betting strategy for what the race is going to be offering to me, and I cap and work my way through races in a way that I feel like is going to be different than everyone else. And I think that's the aspect that is so often forgotten. We're dealing with parimutuel wagering, so you're against everybody else. So if you're winning, I mean, that's never a bad thing, but it's not optimal if when you're winning is when everybody else is winning, because you're probably not making enough to justify making that wager over and over again long term, because there's inevitably going to be, what, 60-70% of the time that you're going to lose, and you won't have made enough money to kind of mitigate those losses that you've had. So I'm definitely somebody who tries to go for a small ticket, big reward. I've
Yep.
always been that way. Anybody who's watched me on TVG knows, I often would have pick threes and pick fours that were very, very small, but the goal for me was to obviously make a big return on that. If you have a $6 ticket, you don't need to hit for 5,000 to get a pretty big ROI there. So that's always the way that I've been. At the end of the day, I'm probably most comfortable as just a pure win better. If I find a 15 to 1 shot or a 20 to 1 shot that I love, I'll get aggressive and just bet that horse to win. But I always try to be really open and always try to be really aware of what everybody else is doing. I think that's the biggest thing that I see, when I see people, you talk about advice, when I see people going into public handicapping and they're new at it, the first thing I see is they'll structure, maybe a pick four on a big day, right? So, it's like all stakes races or something, maybe like Derby undercard.
Right.
And you'll see the structure of the ticket and you'll know that what they're doing is what everybody else is doing, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna go short here in this race, and then this turf race we're gonna use 6 horses, and that's what everybody else is gonna do. So the advice I would give is if you're new to that, or if you're new even to those types of sequences, the very first thing that I would tell you is don't handicap those races in order, because people tend to handicap races in order in general. And then so what you'll see are these kind of like reverse pyramid tickets, because people have a set budget often. So they'll go like 5 deep in race 1 because they
Yeah.
want to
They
stay
don't want to
alive.
be out. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's like, 4 deep, 2 deep, and then single because they're running out of money at the end. You see it all the time. It's prevailing, the most common scenario that you'll see with tickets. So if you are new and you can get yourself out of that, you're already doing pretty well for yourself.
Yeah, I think some of my favorite sequences are when you talk to other players and they're like, yeah, this is a spread race. This is a spread race. I'm like, okay, you spread there. I'm going to single. Like, I want
Oh
to do
yeah.
the exact opposite of what you're doing. If everybody thinks it's a spread race, I'm going to try and plant my flag with a horse and get out of that race so I have a lot of coverage in the races where everybody else is tight.
Exactly. And I think that's what's forgotten. That's how you win big, is doing those things that are different. You don't have to be different than everyone else in every race, but if you can find that one spot in a sequence where, as you say, everyone else is going to use 6 horses, I'm going to use 1.
Yep,
And even if you're smart about the way you're structuring, you could say, okay, I'm going to use 1 here, and then I'm going to play this ticket 3 times or something. That's
exactly.
where you come through with a more aggressive strategy that's going to get you more money in the long run. Maybe you don't hit that day, but it's the sound strategy for the long term. And I
Yes.
know that even that's complicated. A lot of people want to win right here, right now. I'm always about the long term end game.
Well, yeah, if you want to be in this game for a long time, you have to think that way. I mean, you sacrifice short-term success for the long, stay in the game as long as you possibly can. So I'm so glad you picked today's late pick 3, because I thought the races were super competitive. I thought it was a great sequence. And then, we were talking a little bit about your selections, and wow, you've got some prices in here. So I'm really excited to go through these races. And let's start race 8. It's the $100,000 Grade 3 Green Flash. It's a 5-furlong turf sprint. The rails are at 0 feet. It's an interesting assortment of runners. Collusion Illusion is a Grade 1 winner on dirt, and he's in this turf sprint. But the morning line favorite is number 8, Gregorian Chan, at 5-2. He's done really good work at 6 furlongs on the turf. He'll look to cut back and transfer that form to this abbreviated sprint distance. What do you think about this race, Candace?
Yeah, it's a fun little race. I really mulled over this one a lot. and I have a tendency to do this, so I say it out front, but these stakes races in general in America hold form. We have very formful stakes divisions. And so
Mhm.
I'm someone who's always looking at these stakes races, trying to find something like unique. And it just doesn't happen a lot of the times. We don't always get the results like we did yesterday in the Pacific Classic. But this was a race that I could see several horses winning it, but it would take a very specific pace scenario. And I'm not sure the odds that you would get for those horses would be enough to kind of justify the percentage of times they would get that scenario if you were to kind of run the race 100 times. So
Right.
someone like a Lieutenant Dan is a horse who I could definitely see winning this race, but I think he needs a very kind of specific, not super fast pace, something he can either be on the lead or sit just off of and kind of get that nice perfect trip. And I just don't think he's going to get that enough for the odds he's going to be. He's going to be a decently short price, especially off the victory last time out.
Yep.
Second start off of a long layoff. I do think Miati's horses in general run really well first out as well. So I think there's a question of whether he'd replicate that effort even. Good little horse, but he's the perfect type of horse that I would not use in a race like this for that reason. You mentioned Collusion Illusion. I felt the need to use him here. Obviously, Mark Glatt does very well at Del Mar and in Southern California in general, but I think he's easily the class of the field, right? You're talking about a horse who was third in the Santa Anita Sprint Championship last year. The winner was CZ Rocket. I know he was DQ'd, but second past the post was Flagstaff. You mean those might be
Good
your top
sprinters.
two, sprinters in the country right
Really
now.
good
So
sprinters.
pretty good form lines there. In theory, he should enjoy the grass by Twirling Candy.
Yeah.
So I opted to put him in there. I think he's a nice horse. Obviously, he's had some kind of niggles, some health issues, but as long as he's sound, he really should have a say in this race. And then I did use Gregorian Chant. It's kind of a ho-hum race in that race that I'm going for those, two short prices, but it's Gregorian Chant is hard to ignore. I thought the tactics last time out were strange.
Yes, they
I
were
don't want to
indeed.
sit here and question Phil D'Amato, but this is a horse who's always come from way off the pace. To go against that level of competition and a level of competition he had very much earned the right to go against based off what he did out here in Southern California. I thought those tactics were odd. So I'd
I
expect
will
him to go back to what we've seen.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off there, but I will say this: those were not the instructions. I know that for a
Oh,
fact. So
okay.
I think the
That
jockey took
makes
matters
sense.
into his own hands that day. So yes, you're absolutely right that the tactics were not right for that horse, and we will probably see him going back to what he does best.
Yes. Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense because it was not what we've typically seen. And, you even when you go back and watch the race, I mean, if Gregorian Chant is in there with his usual running style, I don't think you see him run seventh again. Maybe he
Yeah.
doesn't win, but I don't think he runs seventh again. So for me, Collusion Illusion and Gregorian Chant were the ones in here. Kind of a little, not a big price to kick things off, but just going to use the two of them. I do think this is a race where I could see people kind of getting a little bit overboard, maybe tossing in a little Juanito or Lieutenant Dan. And so I'm just trying to keep it pretty tight with just the two.
Okay, I don't want to put you on the spot or anything, but I did this race for the Del Mar website because it's their contest race of the day. And while I love your cases for both these horses, and I think they're both terrific, I did come up with someone a little bit different in here. I kind of like
Ooh.
Texas Wedge a little bit. What's your knock on that horse?
Okay, I mean, I can see it. He was. If I was going to have a next horse, it probably would have been him. I gave him a long
Okay.
look. Didn't mind the performance last time out. He kind of made that middle move after having a little bit of trouble early. Every right to kind of fade off of it a little bit from there. We've seen him show ability, obviously, here at Del Mar in the past, and he was able to be in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint at one point and show pace in that race. So I think there's ability there. My trouble with Texas Wedge, I guess I would say, is he's that horse that I feel like for me, he gets me a lot because you watch his races and he always makes that little move that you're like,
Yeah.
oh, he's got a little something
It
there.
doesn't
And then
quite
it
get
kind
there.
of flattens out.
Yeah, it doesn't quite get there. Yeah, and I also thought, I mean, the morning line was 6-1. I thought he'd probably take a little more. If he's live today, he will be a lot shorter than 6-1. So just something
Yeah.
to watch the board for.
Typically
But
the way with those Peter Miller horses.
yes, exactly. All right, so there you go. You got number 4, Collusion Illusion, number 8, Gregorian Chant to start off the late pick 3. And now things are going to get really interesting because we've got some prices coming up here. We've got a competitive $80,000 optional claiming event for horses who have not won 15,000 twice other than, or who have never won 3 races. Got a bunch of horses in here who have a lot of wins, so they're in for that optional 80K tag. I thought there was a fair amount of pace in here, which is probably why John White made number 3, Azul Coast, the 5-2 morning line favorite. He'll sit off the pace, try to make one run. Not really the way you win dirt races in California, but I could see it happening if there's a really fast pace. I know you've got some bombs in here, so why don't you talk us through this race and give out your selections?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about, what was my reasoning for picking this pick 3? This race was why. The irony, everyone knows I love handicapping turf races, but this race is why I like this sequence. Azul Coast jumped off the page to me as a horse I do not like to begin things. I mean, it's tough. Like, I get it. There's respect for Bob Baffert, especially here at Del Mar. But his best horses in general don't have this running style, for one. And the other thing I see here, and I see this with Baffert horses a lot, especially this time of the year, if he's had horses who maybe have had some physical issues, a lot of times he'll bring them back at Del Mar. And what you'll find is that they'll run a race kind of like he did. Something, it was fine, but it wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. He was okay. And people will just assume the horse is going to improve off that. And I just don't find that to be true with Baffert horses. Typically, what you see first off the bench, that's what you're going to get, or something very similar second time around. So I don't see that he's going to necessarily improve. And as you say, that running style is not conducive to winning dirt races, especially going that mile distance here in Southern California. Maybe they go crazy out front and he wins and he beats me, and that's fine. But I'm not going to be using him at any kind of a short price. I'd say something similar for the number 6 Order in Law. Actually, if you were looking to use one of those 2 favorites, I'd probably lean more in that direction. But another horse who I think is going to take some money in this race, and I don't necessarily love. And I think this race is really filled with those types of horses. So I went in a different direction. The horse who immediately jumped off the page to me is the number 5, Fight On. 6 years old now, Buy Into Mischief. He's changed hands a few times recently, was with O'Neill, then was over with John Sadler, and now he's with Mike Maker. And this horse is really interesting in that I can't sit here and say there's anything amazing about him, right? You look back, he was in the Kona Gold, he was 3rd behind Cezanne. He's had some of these kind of 3rd place efforts, 4th place efforts. He's always there, but never really that close to winning. But this move from Maker is interesting for me, to keep him out here, to put him in this race, a race that makes sense. This is kind of the cusp, I think, of this horse's level. Maker, the horses he's kept here at Del Mar in general have done quite well. You're talking about, a trainer who might be the best claiming trainer in the country in Mike Maker. And so I opted to use him. Again, not because there's anything that I'm like, he's going to win for this reason, but because he's going to be a price. I mean, I'll be stunned if he's not a price, just for the money that you'd expect to come in for the Baffert runner, or expect to come in for Bold Endeavor or Order in Law. He's going to be a price. And it's just an interesting enough move that I have to use him. And I'll say that typically that happens to me for Mike Maker horses. I'll see them in different spots. I'm like, this is kind of weird, but I'm intrigued. And so
he must have a reason, right? He's got a reason. I love when good claiming trainers claim a horse and then do something completely different with the horse. Like this horse just is coming out of a 5 furlong turf sprint. Maker claims the horse, puts the horse on dirt, runs him at a mile.
Exactly.
He obviously has an idea of what he thinks this horse can do. So at 15-1 on the morning line, that's a really great case that you make. And you mentioned Zespel's 5-1 on the line, and then the 3rd horse you have here is Manhattan Up, who's 8-1 on the line. So you're looking at like the 5th, 6th, and 7th choices in this race.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned with Fight On, even going back to the last time we saw him routing on the dirt. I mean, he finished a long distance 4th, but it was behind Sleepy Eyes Todd and Blue Harbor. So nobody like that is in this race. And you mentioned my 2 others, Manhattan Up. coming here off the back of a runner-up effort last time out. I thought there was some merit to that. He's a little bit one pace, but if he could just sit there just off the main speeds, I think this was a race that could fall into his lap. And then, yeah, Zestful coming down from Golden Gate, another horse who we've seen race well in Southern California in the past, second behind Tis a Magician in the Tokyo City Cup. You don't see these types of horses typically in a race like this at these sorts of odds. I just think it's a benefit of having a Baffert horse that a lot of people want to win because he showed some ability when he was younger, and I'm just not sure it's going to happen. So I'm going to try and take advantage from a betting perspective.
Well, that's what you need to do. You find the vulnerable favorite and you get involved, and that's why you chose this pick 3, and I love it. So let's move on to race 10, a Calbred maiden special weight for fillies and mares going a mile on the lawn with the rails at 0 feet. Morning line favorite is parked all the way out in the 12 hole. Finley's Kitten at 5-2. She's making her second career start, adding blinkers for Baltus. She ran it better than looked fourth in her debut for a trainer who typically who does much better with his second-time starters. But I mean, the post is no picking, nor is the price. I think she's one you probably want to take on, and I know you want to take her on. So why don't you take us through this race?
I do want to take her on. I love this race as a finishing race too, because you have a big field, right? 12 horses. People are going to try to spread their way through this.
Yes.
And, again, we talk about doing things that are different. I don't think, a lot of people might try to single the Baffert horse in the race prior. You see, we use 3 horses, and then we'll try to condense here in this 12-horse field. The horse who jumped off the page to me of being intriguing was the number 6 Big Bell for Tim Yakteen. Runner-up performance on debut on the dirt, and did it against the bias of the track that day as well. It was a very front-running, favoring track. He came from way off the pace there, or she came from way off the pace, and that was after she blew the start. So she definitely showed some ability in that race, albeit at a lesser level, and then came back in a very similar race last time out, and I thought she ran well. She had some issues in there. She was steadied a couple of times, but she just kept fighting, and I like seeing that prowess from her. Third start now of her career, second time here routing on the dirt. I think she has some promise. She should be a decent price. We're hoping for double figures. The only concern for me is I have concern over the quality of the race she's coming out of, but I'm willing to take that shot knowing she's going to be some decent odds here. So Big Bell, the number 6, is definitely my preference in this race. I do like her quite a bit if you're looking for a win bet. But the other one I used is the number 10, Miss O'Brien, a daughter of Mr. Big. Tried the turf last time out. Very solid second place performance. I'd again expect her to improve off of that effort. Now coming back after she had the bet scratch, you knew I were talking about that prior to us coming on here, that she was a horse who looked to be kind of ripe in that spot in particular. Had some issues out the gate. Wasn't able to run then.
Yes.
Maybe a little bit forgotten about now because it's been a couple of months. So she's intriguing to me in that we've seen some ability from her. And she's a big price. The concern for me with our favorite is not what we've seen from her. I think she has plenty of ability. But if I'm going to start working my way out to post 10, 11, and 12 on this turf course, you better be giving me, 15 to 1.
Yes, you want the odds
I'm not
built
doing
into
it for
the
5-2.
You're absolutely right, and I love your 2 selections here. Number 6, Big Bell, 12-1 on the morning line, and I think you'll probably get that close to that. And Miss O'Brien at 15-1 on the morning line. So we got boxcars to end this pick 3 sequence. I'm going to post it up here. I'll also tweet it out when I send out the archive link to this to this live stream. You got 4-8 with 145 with 610, and if this hits, it's going to be a very nice payout because you've got some huge prices. So I just want to thank you so much, Candace, for joining us. This wraps up this week's edition of Best Bet. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We'll do it again next Sunday. As I always like to say, good luck to us, and let's make some money. See everybody next week. Thanks again, Candace.